Welcome, everybody, to Rico 12. I'm Justin, your host, and a beautifully imperfect, stumbling, bumbling child of an absolutely powerful and perfectly loving God and a recovering addict. It is great to be back in this seat. Thank you so much to Silvio for filling in and soothing us all with his silky accent and amazing guests over the last 3 weeks. It was very much appreciated so I could spend some time with family and with God and nature. And it's just great to be back, though, in this seat. Rico 12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers represent various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, thus showing the common threads of recovery, no matter our addiction or affliction. Today's speaker for the 270th meeting is Jay Westbrook, who spoke to us previously on meeting number 106 on applying the traditions in romantic relationships. If you haven't heard that one, or if it's been a while, I highly recommend you give it a listen. Jay's chosen topic today is staying sober through life's ups and downs, and I look forward to hearing his message here in just a few minutes. First, for a little bit of business. Rico 12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, connect more, just hang out and learn and grow with us, you can check out the other podcasts that you can find at rico12.com. That's RECO12.com. And to join in our social communities, you can check out the chat. I'll put some of that information in the chat here and in the show notes of the podcast. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue our mission. Thanks to our spearheads for new and repeat contributors. Thank you all who donated over the last few weeks. Sean, Catherine, Nicole, and Lisa. Your donations really help in this project. If you also feel the desire to become a spearhead and support this cause, consider visiting rico12.com/support or click on the links that I'll have in the show notes in the chat for one-time or monthly donation options. Your support, not just financially, but with your word of mouth, makes a difference in keeping us able to share these messages of recovery. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for today, Jay Westbrook, and give just a little bit of background on him. Jay has been sober since December 2nd of 1988. He spent most of that time in Los Angeles, but moved to Tupelo, Mississippi about 2 years ago. He's been a hospice nurse and a grief and loss counselor for over 3 decades. Jay authored Compassionate Journeys, Lessons from My Work with the Dying, and has a new book, Relationship Resilience, Applying the 12 Traditions to Relationships, being released next month. When asked how he is, Jay always responds, blessed, and closes each of his writings, whether it be text, email, or posts, with, as always, in love and service, Jay. Jay, we look forward to hearing some of your love and service. Take it away. The floor is yours.
Yay. Oh, God. Hey, y'all. My name is Jay Westbrook. I'm an alcoholic and sober today by God's mercy in the practice of the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. So grateful to be here and going to talk to you a little bit about staying sober through life's ups and downs. And I don't know if I do a trigger warning or not. I'm going to take a minute and tell you a little bit about my background. And I do mean a little. I'm not one of those that says I'm going to take a minute to do that and then 28 minutes later is still talking about it. Mom went out the door when I was 5 months old, never came back. Dad remarried when I was 2. When I was 3, Dad and stepmom wanted to focus on career, so they gave me away to another family that I hope they thought was a good family. They weren't. And I was 3 years old, terrified of the dark, and they locked me in a pitch black closet for 3 years. And that's where I lived, toileted, slept, ate, existed. Pulled out once a day to be washed, ritualistically tortured, and or raped, and shattered me completely. Lost my sanity and safety and innocence and trust and security, any sense that I could say no, and lost, got filled with anger and hate and rage, and it wasn't safe to turn on my perpetrator. So I learned how to turn it on me. And that was a behavior that lasted for decades of hurting myself with my wounds. At 6, I got pulled out of that, reunited with my parents, periodically re-victimized because predators can spot prey. Moved to California when I was 15, I think, maybe 16, and about a year later found drugs and alcohol, and they saved my life. Let me stay on the planet, kept me from suiciding, but made me pretty stupid over time. And the stupidity led to bad decision-making over time, and the decision-making, bad decision-making. What's that country song? I gotten real good at making real bad decisions. I think that's what it is. And those decisions put me in front of a power greater than myself. First ever encounter with the criminal justice system, and he sends me to the penitentiary. I didn't even know there was a difference between jail and prison, but off I went. And it took me 5 hours to learn the difference. And that first night coming up from chow hall, 5 guys grabbed me and beat me almost to death and gang raped me. And that became that's once that happens, I didn't know in the penitentiary, that's who you are until you're out. And that was my path. And when I got out of that prison, I was broken on every level a man can be broken on. I was filled with bitterness and blame and cowardice and irresponsibility and rage and massive PTSD and shame, and went back to the lifestyle and went to school and got a lot of letters after my name. And, the first step that says we're powerless over alcohol or whatever your poison is, gambling, food, drugs, smoking, I got that. I could not stop, no matter what oath or promise I made. I'm not going to drink until 5. I'm not going to drink till the weekends. I'm not going to get high until tonight. It could not keep that oath. But the second part of that step says, and our life is unmanageable. And that gets a little tricky, because here's what it looked like from the outside. I was married. This is Nancy. If you want to see a picture of her, stunningly beautiful, highly intelligent, and kinder than she was beautiful or smart. And we had a beautiful apartment in West Hollywood, California, and I drove a nice car. And I should preface it by saying Nancy and I never had children because we don't like them. And thank God we didn't have them. There are people that don't like them and they go ahead and have them. I don't understand. But I was associate director of medical research at a children's hospital in Los Angeles. And that's alcoholism. I don't like children. And where am I working? At a children's hospital. And the reason I worked there was I had a business card that said associate director of medical research. And I thought that would impress you. I had a fantasy that would impress you because I knew a piece of shit like me couldn't impress you. And I was so miserable, baffled, bewildered, hopeless, godless, anxietous, living with PTSD, filled with shame, engaging in pitiful and incomprehensibly demoralizing behaviors, engaged in behaviors that validated the lie that when God made me, he made junk, engaging in behaviors that validated the lie that I told myself about my worth and value. And so unmanageable when you have that kind of title, that kind of wife, that kind of car, that kind of salary, that it was kind of hard, but it was unmanageable on that thought highway that ran between my ears. And I didn't even think about AA. What happened was I just couldn't do it anymore. And I was going to kill myself. Thank God I'm an alcoholic, or I would have put a gun in my mouth and pulled the trigger. But because I'm an alcoholic, meaning I'm arrogant, I'm grandiose, I'm immature, I decided to stage it to look like an accident. So the accidental death insurance policies would kick in, and it had to be a Tuesday or Friday between blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there on the day of this planned staged suicide, And a public service announcement came on television that I'd seen 99 times and thrown the finger. And that day, I burst into tears and picked up the phone. And 90 minutes later, I was in a meeting. And it was pretty amazing. It was a Cocaine Anonymous meeting. And I don't know what I said in it, but after the meeting, they said, honey, you're really sick. And I said, thank you. And they said, no, it wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. You're really sick. You'd benefit from morning meetings. We're cocaine addicts. We don't do anything in the morning. Go to AA, go to Log Cabin in West Hollywood. It's AA, but you can talk about drugs. And it's a little old log cabin in the middle of West Hollywood. And I went, and on my third day sober, December 5th, 1988, I walked into Log Cabin for the first time at 7:30 a.m. And it's a big meeting, usually 150, 180 people, movie stars and homeless people and Grammy winners and secretaries and carpenters and lawyers and, people who would not normally mix. And I had the first miracle. There was a gay boy in a pink shirt, just like this, standing at the top of the steps. And he took one look at me and he knew I was new. And he said, hi, honey. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you leave your fantasies at the door, all of your dreams can come true in AA if you're willing to work for them. And I about fell over because I didn't know there was a difference between fantasies and dreams. And I was living a fantasy. And the fantasy was, if I gave you this business card, you will be impressed with me. And you weren't. And the dream that I was ignoring was to work with the dying. And when that meeting ended at 8:30 a.m. with 3 days sober, start of 3 days sober, I drove into the hospital and quit my job and drove downtown to County General Hospital, the big hospital that serves the poorest of the poor, and got a job just as a cancer nurse for a year and got recruited to the pain management service and did pain management for a year. And then I made the leap to hospice. And I neglected to say that I was raised atheist, drilled into my head. Don't ever believe in God. God is the opiate of the masses. It's used to control people. There is no God. And I parroted that. Parroted. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And the things, my vocabulary when I got to the rooms was comprised of words like this. No, that won't work. Well, that won't work for me. I'm not hurting anyone but myself. I'm the victim here. If you had the childhood I had, then you drink and use the way I did. Very defensive, very dishonest, defiant, immature, arrogant, grandiose. I could go on and on. Self-pitying, self-righteous, selfish, scorekeeping, manipulative, etc. And here's what happened. I started working hospice, and the place where life and death meet is filled with God. Period. That's not a thought. It's not a question. It's not a theory. It's not a hypothesis. For me, it was an experiential certainty, and I couldn't believe it. But on death call after death call after death call after death call, middle of the day, middle of the night, early morning, there was God. And I couldn't deny it. And it was absolute certainty. And all I had to do then was try and figure out how I could make that work with my history. And here's where I got to, that there's a loving God who designed it, created it, put it in motion, and gave us free will. My God is a non-intervening God, co-journeys with me, never, ever leaves my side. Co-journeys with me, co-suffers with me, but does not intervene. Watched me being raped at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and wept at my suffering, and looked at my rapists and wept at their suffering. that they'd moved so far from his grace, but did not intervene because he made them with everything they needed for redemption and me with everything I needed for resilience. And I don't know if they reached for it, but I know that I did through drugs and alcohol. And when that didn't work, then through the powerful fellowship and the transformative 12 steps and 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where I found my resilience. You know, this AA repair shop put me back together. And today I'm whole, WHOLE. That means nothing missing, nothing broken. I'm healthy sexually, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all a product of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, and I stayed sober in the beginning because y'all said insane things to me like, it's Jay, right? Like you remembered my name. And then you said even more insane things like, what is it? What? It's 11 days today? And a week later, you got 18 days now, don't you? I mean, it just blew me away. And I walked in and I saw those words, God, 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 when I was a newcomer on the steps and looked around the rooms and, you know, and did what newcomers do, immediately started identifying the differences and separating myself and judging you. And you don't, oh my God, you're, and then you all opened your mouths. You spoke the language of the heart. You talked in a way that I never heard, you know, that was so honest and so vulnerable and so we-based, and my shoulders dropped. And I was able to exhale, and my feelings rolled down my cheeks in the form of tears. And I stayed. I'm in my first sobriety. My sober date's December 2nd, 1988. And I've had lots of reasons to leave, to relapse. I just haven't done it. And I don't know which has been harder. I really don't. The staying sober through the bad stuff or the good stuff, because I've had a slew of both. And just got so moved. My nickname for the first 18 months of my sobriety was Puddles, because every morning when that 7:30 a.m. meeting ended, there was a really small puddle of tears on the wooden table where I was sitting right up front every single day. I just cried my way through those first 18 months because I was so broken. There's so much shame and so much PTSD, and I just didn't know. And God bless the women of Alcoholics Anonymous. They knew my wife. You know, she was in the rooms with me, and they knew I was safe, and they took me into their little private female-only house meetings for incest recovery, and saved my life and let me stay and let me know I wasn't alone, and taught me that what happened to me as a child doesn't matter. It's not comparable, because people hear my story and go, oh my God, me too. But mine wasn't anything as bad as yours. Mine was just touching, or just, there is no word when we're talking about this of just, because what we see is in the adult, the effects are the same, whether it was somebody watching us in the shower or somebody exposing themselves or somebody touching us, or it was penetration. The result, the consequences for the child when that child becomes an adult are identical. So there isn't a worst or there isn't a just. It's like we're survivors. And I used to be ignorant and say, yeah, you know, you've lived through the worst. You've lived through the experience. This is just the memory of it. If you survive that, you can survive the memory. And I didn't I just didn't know any better, and sometimes when you're in the middle of that, those gang rapes in the penitentiary and what was happening to me as a kid, I was just struggling to stay alive, to not die. And so that's where my attention was. And then in the memory of it, my life isn't threatened and I can be fully aware of the experience and remember every detail of it. And that can be harder and create more shame and more trauma than actually occurred during the real time event. I didn't know that. And so I had to get outside help for outside issues. And I did. And the people in the rooms were so supportive, and thank God that's what they did. I can't. We can. I can. We can. I get drunk. We stay sober. I drink and use no matter what. We don't drink or use no matter what. And that's the difference between the I and the we. I remember I had a lot of black and white thinking in the beginning, and I thought, everybody, that's black and white thinking, always, never, everyone, nobody, everyone in AA was happy except me. And I was one of those guys who ran around asking, what do I need to do to get happy? And some old timer said to me, kid, it's been a long time since I've been called kid. So old timer said, kid, stop worrying about what you need to do to get happy and just stop doing the things that are making you unhappy. Blew me away. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten in Alcoholics Anonymous. So powerful. I worked real hard as a hospice nurse, and I worked with people and cases that were so difficult, and it's a gift of my childhood, because in my childhood I suffered so profoundly that I cultivated a relationship with suffering, and that suffering became my vehicle for awakening compassion in me and for me and for others. And as I aged, I had that relationship. And it's what's allowed me to simply bear witness with a compassionate presence to the suffering of another person, my patients and their families, without riding in on a white horse like I'm going to rescue people, bringing the restraint and the humility and the courage and the compassion to simply bear witness with a compassionate presence unless and until I'm invited to do more. Some people need to suffer at the end of life because of their value system, because of trying to right the scales, whatever it is. They're suffering emotionally, spiritually, physically, intellectually. I've got the tools, but I don't get to impose them. And so my colleagues and others started nominating me for awards, and I was winning them, and it's not my intention. And I've got full page on my resume of all these awards. Pain management, for hospice visionary, for blah, blah, blah. And one was Nurse of the Year. And I was flown into Washington, D.C. for the ceremony, and was on the steps of the Capitol, and there were congressmen and congresspeople there and senators. And it was a big deal. And I was given a plaque, and I was given a statue or award, whatever. It's not statue. I can't remember what they call it. But it was just, I was on cloud nine, and Nancy hadn't been able to join me. She was doing stuff. And I stayed sober. I didn't go and get any cocaine. I didn't stop by the crack house or the bar for a hit on the pipe or a cocktail to celebrate. I just went for a walk. And I found myself in front of the Vietnam Memorial. 5? Is that what you said? And I'd never seen those 58,200 names of people who wrote a check made out to the United States of America in any amount up to and including my life. The United States of America cashed those checks, and those 58,200 people died. And I lied when I was drafted. I lied about my drug use, and I did it in a way that they gave me a 4F. And I stood there and looked at that wall, and I watched the families touching those names and sobbing. And I wondered what name was up there because I didn't go. Not that I necessarily would have been up there instead, but I just wondered what name is on that wall because I didn't go. And it just filled me with so much shame. And there was nothing to do. And I went home and I talked about it in my meetings, and people said, Jay, God had another plan for you. God, look at the work you do. You work with the dying and you're amazing. And it's like, yeah, well, that's nice for you to say. And it's nice for me to hear, but I don't know that the families of those dead men and women would feel the same. I don't know that they'd think it was great that I lived and theirs died. And I haven't been able to write that in my mind. I do a lot of lecturing at the VA medical centers around the country. When I do, I don't take a speaking fee. I pay my own airfare. I pay my hotel. It's part of how I give back, but it doesn't, in my mind, balance the scales. And sometimes we just have to live with the dis-ease, the discomfort that we are human, and we've done stuff that's irreparable. Also, 11 weeks to the day after our 42nd wedding anniversary, Nancy was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and given 4 months to live. And I said, she'll have 7. And it was 2 days short of 7 months. And we co-journeyed together, and she died in my arms in our home on hospice. And the ground went out from under me, and I didn't know if I could stay sober. But I got real clear I wasn't going to disrespect the program that gave me so much, that gave Nancy so much. She died with 23 and a half years sober. And I wouldn't disrespect the program that gave Jancy, Jay and Nancy. We were Jancy, that couple, AA couple. And so I reframed my pain as small price to pay for a lifelong love affair, small price to pay. Took my wedding ring off and gave it to JR. He's a custom jeweler in Beverly Hills. Gave him Nancy's ring and said, melt them together and make me a new one. And that's what I wear today. And, and a couple of years later, my book came out. That's Jay and Nancy on the cover, and that's my favorite picture of us. And Compassionate Journeys, Lessons from My Work with the Dying. And I'm so proud of this work. It's an amazing stories of my work with the dying. But I didn't get to share it with Nancy, And we've buried 1 bloodhound, 1 cat, and 13 coonhounds, blue ticks, red bones, black and tans through the years. And it's heartbreaking. Entrance fees are so low and exit fees are so high. And we've stayed sober through the deaths of all those dogs. And I stayed sober through Nancy's death. I heard maybe I'll close with this. I heard a speaker about a month ago, and he said he'd come into Alcoholics Anonymous 51 years ago. And he had 11 years sober. And multiple times he had thrown away double-digit sobriety. And he says, you want to know what happened? I forgot to remember. And those 4 words are so powerful. I hope I never forget to remember. I don't want to forget to remember how bad it is out there. I don't want to ever forget to remember how good it is in here. and how privileged we are to get to do the work, to stay sober and better fit ourselves to be of service to God and others and to serve others. I don't ever want to forget to remember how hard it is to come into these rooms when you don't know, you just know you're dying out there and you can't live one more day with it or without it, and you don't think this will work. And I don't ever want to be in that position again. So I am a very grateful alcoholic. My name is Jay Westbrook, and I so appreciate the opportunity to have shared with you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate your shares. Just power and emotion and real in there. Thank you for sharing the pain as well as the joy of your life. A reminder to our live audience, we're now going to go into Q&A. If you have a question for Jay, please type it in the chat. If you want to remain anonymous, you can send it directly, a direct message to me, or just put in the chat anonymous, please, and I will make that question anonymous. I've also written down several questions, and I want to start off with a question that you came close to wrapping up with. You said entrance fees are so low, but exit fees are so high. And you were relating that to life, and you also tied it in a little bit to the rooms. Why don't you take just a minute and tie that into the rooms? Entrance fees are so low, even though, man, when I came through the rooms, I thought I was dying. I thought I was going to just shrink in shame for that. And I thought the fee was so high. But talk about that phrase when it comes to entering and exiting the rooms.
Okay, I'll deflect for a minute while my brain thinks about that. I was really talking about all those amazing dogs we've had, and that's my relationship with pets. Entrance fees are so low. Oh my God, puppy, I love you. Exit fees, when they die, it's just like your heart is torn out of your chest, and it's so painful. Entrance fees are so low, exit fees are so high. The same with, we meet someone, we meet a Nancy and fall in love. Oh my God, you eat your ice cream with a spoon? So do I. We must be made for each other. We're in love. Amore prima vista, love at first sight. And then when Nancy died, it was so hard, And Nancy reminded me, she said, I know this is so hard on you, sweetheart. You're losing me and you love me so much, but I'm losing you and everyone and everything I care about, and just, so that's the way I was using it. I don't think it applies to the rooms. I don't think our entrance fees are low. We paid an incredible price. And so do most of the people around us. If nobody has said it, I'm not hurting anyone but me is a lie. And we hurt ourselves, we hurt our families, we hurt our neighborhoods, we hurt our communities, we hurt our country. When I moved to Tupelo, Mississippi, I didn't transfer my California nursing license here. So I've stopped doing hospice nursing here. I just do the grief and loss, grief recovery counseling. And the number of parents who have had adult children die, or teen children, but so many have had adult children die of fentanyl overdoses. And you see the toll that it takes. It tears apart families, neighborhoods, communities, and it's heartbreaking. And I don't have solutions, but yeah, and entrance fees are not low for Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the anonymous programs. And exit fees are very high here if you leave and go back out. But it's almost like entrance fees are high and exit fees are high. And it's free, but the fees are very high. They're just not financial.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for walking through that. And I really appreciate you expounding on that and opening my eyes further on that. We do have an anonymous comment pushback on you a little bit on something you said. This person says, he said that some things we have to live with are unrepairable. I don't think that's the case. Can you please expand on that a little bit? How some of the things maybe we've done, why you say they're unrepairable, and share that with us.
Yeah, it's I don't get to make an amends for having told the lie in a very manipulative way and very intentional way to get a 4F so that I didn't have to go to Vietnam, not because I was morally opposed to the war. I wasn't a conscientious objector. I was a partier and I wanted to get laid and get high. And oh, I'm not going over there and they have mosquitoes and it's no. And I got out of it it had never bothered me until that day when I was just walking and not even looking for that memorial and came upon that Vietnam memorial. Boy, when you stand and look at those names, the breadth of that, the depth of that suffering and the loss, I don't know how to make amends. And I've spoken a lot at the VA on AA panels, and I always tell them that story. You know, that's part of why I'm there. And I do the lecturing for the physicians and the palliative care teams and the nurses at the VA. But in my mind, it just doesn't balance the scale. And I think of this guy I had, and I was the clinical director of a palliative care program in a hospital, and they called me up for a pain management consult. And I went up, and this guy, they had his door closed and a blanket taped over it, and you could still hear these agonizing screams coming from it. And I went and I looked at the orders, and they were perfect for pain management. And then I looked, and it wasn't being given. And it turned out he was refusing them. And when I talked to him, he said he was in his mid 60s, and he said, as a young man, I committed murder, and I did over 30 years in the penitentiary, and now I'm dying. I've been out 13 years, and I know that when I die, God is going to have me suffer horrendously for eternity. And I'm just thinking, if I can suffer enough here physically, maybe it'll right the scales, balance the scales, and I won't suffer quite as long, maybe half of eternity, you know. And he believed that. He had a punishing, judgmental, punishing God. And for him, there was no way to right the scales for having committed that murder. This is the same kind of thing for me. I don't know how to balance it. I don't know which family might feel rage or resentment or blame towards me that their person died and I lied to get out of going. So it's just one of those things I live with, and not much I can do about it. I also carry $1 million of life insurance on me, always have, and $500,000 on Nancy. And we crossed some age threshold, and that annual premium came due, and I went, holy God, it was a big jump. And I looked at me, and I was 50 pounds heavier and a kind of sedentary hospice nurse, and Nancy was out in the yard doing her martial arts, and she's slim and healthy. And I said, obviously, I'm the one who's going to die with a heart attack or stroke. And I just, without saying a word to her, I decided to not pay the premium on her policy. And 30 days later, they canceled it for non-payment. And 20 days after that, Nancy was diagnosed and told she had 4 months to live. And she said to me, this is so hard. I'm losing everyone and everything that I love and care about. But I got to tell you, I'm so comforted knowing there's going to be that $500,000 cushion to carry you through retirement. And I wouldn't lie to her. She could have read it in my face in a minute. And I told her, And she said, why would you do that? You've got the fourth tradition that tells you in a marriage, each person is autonomous, self-governing, except in matters affecting the other partner or the couple as a whole. Why would you make that decision unilaterally? And I said, I don't know, honey. I was thoughtless. I was inconsiderate. I'm stingy, um, impulsive. And I cried and she cried and she forgave me. And we said, I'm sorry. But here's the deal. If I take a nice ceramic plate, dinner plate, and I drop it on the floor and it breaks and I go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, plate. The damn plate is still broken. Sorry doesn't mean very much. And Nancy carried that burden of worrying about my financial future all the way to her death. And now I get the burden of knowing I added to Nancy's burden when it was the last thing she needed. And that's nothing I can't make that right. There are just certain things I have to live with, like, oh my God, I just stepped in it. And if you want a milder example, I want to be thought of as cute and clever. That's my biggest character defect. I'm looking for attention, as being seen as cute and clever. And at Live Log Cabin, we always asked, are there any out of towners? And she stood up and said, I'm Susie from London. And I yelled out, smashing. And the room laughed. And then some guy said, I'm visiting here. I'm Buck from Dallas. And I said, well, bless your little heart. And everybody laughed. And another guy stood up and said, I'm John from New Jersey. And I went, oh, I'm so sorry. And everybody laughed. And then the speaker spoke, and then it was sharing. And the guy from New Jersey stood up and said, my name's John. I just flew in from New Jersey to bury my mother. And I got to tell you guys, you're making fun of where I come from. Didn't make me feel very welcome. And I can say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I'm the one who said it, but then the whole room laughed at his expense. And there's no way to undo that. And of course I made an amends after the meeting, but he'd already had the experience of feeling unwelcomed and the butt of our jokes. It's not everything is repairable.
Yeah. You talked about making amends. How does living amends work in that situation, in these situations that you're talking about? Yes, I caused pain. I dropped the plate. I did whatever it was. I canceled the life insurance policy. Living amends moving forward. How does that look in your life?
Just being, in each example, being a little bit more attentive, putting that pause in place and using that fourth tradition filter. Is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do something I can do autonomously, or does it affect I don't have a romantic partner, but does it affect my dog? Does it affect my meeting? Does it affect my workplace? Or if not, then I can make this decision autonomously. But if it does affect others, I need to include them in the decision. Maybe it's friends, maybe it's colleagues, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a dog, maybe it's a lover, but employing that pause. And that's it in that situation, the pause in the saying, New Jersey, I'm so sorry. Same pause. Is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do going to create greater separation or greater unity? That's the first tradition filter. Is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do going to create greater separation or greater unity? So in whatever situation I find myself, I can use one of those filters. Seventh tradition filter that talks about the money. AA is self-supporting, but it's so much more. Is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do self-sabotaging or self-supporting? And if it's self-sabotaging, I don't say it or I don't do it.
Yeah, thank you for walking through that. It's beautiful. Got another question from an anonymous attendee here. Person says, Jay, with your experience with people near to death and suffering pain, how can I die in peace and be reborn continuously in a day so I don't give life for granted?
So the Buddhists say that the best preparation for a good death is to lead a good life. And it's true. And they also say that life and death are our most valuable gifts, but that mostly they go unopened. So, to answer more specifically, if you want a death that's pain-free, then do some research up front and find a hospice in your area and talk to them about how strong is their pain management program so that you're sure you get with a hospice that has good pain management, because 98% of the pain can be contained. We're really good at pain management. It's very little that's beyond our reach. And but not every hospice not every hospital, not every doctor is schooled in pain management. And there's a lot of fear about, addiction, and, without understanding that there's a difference between physiological dependence and addiction. Doctors don't understand that. They're hesitant to prescribe. I don't want to turn this 89-year-old woman into a drug addict. You won't. She'll be physiologically dependent on that opioid, but that doesn't make her an addict. So we do a lot of teaching on that. And other than that, there's a meditation that's very good that addresses the second part of that question. And you're kind of following the breath, and it's just dying on the out breath, touching God at that pause between the end of the out breath and the beginning of the in breath, being reborn on the in breath, touching God in that moment between the end of the in breath and the start of the out breath, over and over and over until that moment when there is no more in breath. And that's a very powerful meditation that you have to, depending on how long your in and out breaths are, you may need to change the wording, but it's basically dying on the out breath, being reborn on the in breath, touching God at the pause between each of the two, the end of the one and the beginning of the other. Yeah. And it kind of sensitizes you to the fact that that's what we really have, is one breath at a time. Not one day at a time, not 1 hour, but one breath.
Love that. Thank you for bringing that down to the one breath at a time. Beautiful. Have a couple more questions from our live audience. This one's from Ran. Ran says, what advice do you have for someone struggling to get step one?
Well, it depends on what part of step one. There are two parts. We admitted we were powerless over some given substance or behavior, and that our lives had become unmanageable. And usually people aren't walking in the doors if they don't understand the first part of it. Why would you come in if you really believed in your heart of hearts, your honest bottom of your heart, that you were not powerless over alcohol or food or gambling or nicotine or sexing or whatever the behavior is? Why would you have found out where a meeting was and logged on or walked in? I don't quite understand, unless it's just curiosity. And I'll tell you, Nancy had absolutely no interest in getting sober. I got sober and she was like, no. And it was terrifying because we could feel ourselves pulling apart. And but she got lonely. And I said to her again, I've told you before, honey, but I'll say it again. You don't have to be sober to go. And it was like she heard it and went, oh my God, could you wait a minute? And ran in the kitchen. And I could hear the sound of one ice cube dropping into a crystal rocks glass. Because, 3 ice cubes would leave less room for the liquor. And I heard her drop one ice cube in and pour the drink and do a couple of lines of cocaine, and came out with a smile on her face and a little cocaine caked into the corner of her nose, and said, okay, let's go. And off we went. And she started going to meetings with me, drunk, loaded, no interest in sobriety, but she was lonely and she wanted the socialization, and people were so kind. Nobody pushed her. And you know what happened? She caught alcoholism through her ears, listening to what was being said in the rooms. And on my 90th day, Nancy stood up and said, I'm Nancy Morgan Westbrook. I'm a cocaine addict and an alcoholic, and stayed clean and sober the rest of her life, another 23 and a half years. So that's the first part of it. And unmanageable, you have to define yourself. Like I said, for some people, it means being broke, losing your job, losing your house, losing your family. The kids get taken away. You're pushing a shopping cart. You're peeing your pants. You're filthy. That's unmanageable. And for somebody else like me, still had the house and the wife and the career but man, I was pushing a shopping cart internally. I was so consumed with self-hate and insanity, just like a hamster wheel in there, and just couldn't get a moment's relief. And just that chatty voice, that accusing, and wouldn't stop screaming at me, and what a piece of shit I am, and I deserved it. Oh my God, it was just horrendous. And that was unmanageable for me. I could not manage. So I think when I teach physicians and nurses about working with the dying, I talk about the Braille system. And if you've ever watched a blind person read a page of Braille, they feel their way across the page. And that's what we have to do with our patients, because what worked with patient A may not work with patient B. And what worked with the family of patient A this morning may not work with them this afternoon. So we feel our way along. We pause outside the door, check to see which side the hinges are on, not because we care, but because it's a centering technique, so that when I walk into that room, I'm fully present, and I can feel what needs to be done. And this is the same kind of thing. We kind of feel our way along, but not a lot of people end up in the 12-step rooms by mistake. It's not like you come into an AA meeting on a 7:30 a.m. Monday morning because you had a little bit too much champagne at a wedding over the weekend. There's got to be a reason that you end up in there. And most likely, if you just listen, stop arguing, stop saying, I know, that won't work for me. That won't work. Oh, that's stupid. It's like, dude, you can't swim. There's a shark coming. You're screaming, save me. I throw you a life preserver, and you look at it and go, don't you have a blue one? It's like, no, grab the goddamn life preserver and let us pull you up. Well, how close is that shark? It's how many are there? There's only one. You want to try and battle it in the water? Well, maybe, it's like, okay, well, you let us know when you're ready to be rescued. So.
No, good stuff, Jay. I've got one more question before we start wrapping up here. This comes from Lynn. Lynn says, so much of your share was about forgiveness, but you seem to struggle with forgiving yourself for some of your bigger mistakes. What would you suggest to a sponsee who is still stuck in morbid reflection over past mistakes after working their steps, but still holding on to that shame? And then Lynn gives an example, a sponsee who's had one or more abortions. So how do we deal with that without diving into morbid reflection?
Real hard. I've forgiven myself for most, not all. And part of it is understanding what forgiveness is and what forgiveness isn't. And forgiveness is not forgetting. Oh, forgive and forget. No, you don't forget. Forgiveness is not about approving, condoning, or excusing the behavior of another person. And it's also getting real clear that you don't forgive for the other person. We forgive for ourselves for, I was going to say two, really three reasons. One is so that we can honor the sign you always see in Las Vegas that says you must be present to win. Because if I'm looking back there at yesterday or last decade or my childhood, I'm looking back at the past. Right in front of me is an opportunity for service, for career, for friendship, for love. I don't even see it because I'm looking back there. So forgiveness is the path out of the past back to the present. The second reason is to be free of all those feelings of bitterness and blame and vengeance and anger and resentment because they're so corrosive. And those two things really combine to feed the third purpose of forgiveness, which is to better fit ourselves to be of service to God and others. There's a great story of these two 18-year-old kids. They were just turned 18 and World War II broke out. And they both enlisted in the Army, and they went down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and they went through basic training, and then they went through advanced paratrooper training, and they flew them over to Europe to fight the Nazis. And they jump out of the plane, and they're coming down in their parachutes, and they're both shot, wounded, captured, imprisoned, tortured, and eventually liberated. And they come back to the States, and they fall out of touch. And decades later, as old men, they're reunited at one of those reunions for World War II veterans. And they're old men, and they see each other and they hug, and they're misty-eyed. And the first one says, "It's so good to see you. Oh my God, I need to ask, have you forgiven our captors?" And the second one screams, "Never." And the first one says, then I guess they still hold you captive. And that's such a powerful story about why we forgive. And after that Amish schoolhouse shooting in whenever it was, 06 or 08, John Monville got crazy and went to the school and shot 10 girls and then killed himself, killed 5 of those girls. And that afternoon, Marie, his wife, she's not Amish. She's sitting there with her 2 daughters, reeling with what her husband has done and his death. And she looks out the window, and here come 5 Amish men, very stern, with their beards and coveralls and hats, and they're headed towards her house. And they come right up to the door, and they knock, and she opens the door, and they said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "No." And they said, "Neither are we. We are the 5 fathers of the 5 girls who were murdered this morning by your husband. And we want you to know that we forgive you and we forgive John." And 3 days later, when John was buried, 280 Amish people showed up single file to create a barrier between the media circus and the grave site, so that John could be buried in privacy and dignity. And that became the story, the forgiveness. And they asked the Amish people, "Why would you forgive ever, let alone forgive so quickly?" And their answer was, because of the emotional enormity of our grief. It will take every fiber of our focus and concentration and heart to heal this grief, and we cannot afford to be distracted with feelings of vengeance, bitterness, blame, anger, rage, resentment. So we choose to forgive so that we can come over here and heal. And immediately they knocked that school down and turned it into pasture land, and like Amish, working like ants, built a new school on a new site immediately and set about doing their healing. And those two stories are so powerful in illustrating the importance of forgiveness and why we do it and how we do it.
Thank you so much, Jay. We're going to wrap this up now. Such a beautiful share. Thank you all for being here for this fantastic RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting. If you have other questions, please consider joining our WhatsApp community, and we can post those questions there, and the community can address those also. You can join there by sending an email to rico12pod@gmail.com, RECO12POD@gmail.com. Next week, we will be hearing from our first-time speaker, Erica D., and we're looking forward to her talk. And thanks again to Silvio D. for the last 3 weeks for lifting RICO 12 above and beyond what we've been doing for the last 3 years. I'm so grateful I was able to step away and spend time with family and nature and God for the last 3 weeks. Stay tuned in the WhatsApp community and join our email list if you haven't already, so that you can know when these meetings are happening and come and join with us. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. Jay, would you be willing to lead us in that, please?
Sure. Can I say something real quick? Within the next 2 or 3 weeks, my new book will be out, Relationship Resilience, applying the 12 traditions to relationships. And it's going to be a very special book. So let's take a moment of silence for those that suffer in or out of this room, and then join me in the we version of the Serenity Prayer. Prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen and amen.
And thank you so much, Jay. And everybody, remember, there is one that has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back. Come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground, I can still be found. Standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal that I am bowed and broken, I am standing still.
Only God knows where the path of life will yet lead me. I do not even ask to know, I do not need to see.
It is enough to know that I'm loved of God alone. And with those truths, I thankfully march into the unknown. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground, I can still be found. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. searching